Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Adoptions from the Heart TV. I'm your host, Amanda Aliberti. Today, we're going to be sitting down with Mike and Marie, who have adopted a child through our program, and they're actually came back around a second time to build their family. Now let's turn to Mike and Marie. Welcome, Mike and Marie. How are you?
Good.
So can you guys first start by sharing a little bit about your journey before you came to Adoptions from the Heart and what made you do the switch from, where you had been to adoption?
We got married young, so we decided that for us it was best to wait a while before trying to build a family. And I think it was around 5 years that we decided we were ready. One of the things I think helped us is we always kind of had a casual approach to it. It was never okay, we are going to start trying to build a family and it must happen now. So I think that helped us a lot because we started around 5 years into marriage, and then I feel like it was 2 years.
It's a couple of years.
It's a while. We've been married 14 years. Before we decided that, hey, it's not happening. We need to go see a specialist. So we made an appointment with a fertility specialist, some treatments there. We did a couple rounds of Clomid, unsuccessful, obviously, and then did letrozole with IUI. I think we did 5 or 6 rounds of that.
How many years in total would you say that you worked with the doctor, were still exploring trying to biologically conceive?
Good question.
Was it like 2 years, 3 years? Okay.
At least 2 or 3 because we spread it out a lot. We met with them and then they, we don't really see anything wrong. We don't really know why you're not getting pregnant. I think at that point I was like, well, maybe if I do some diet adjustments, maybe that would help. So then we took a pause, did some diet stuff, did not help. Mm-hmm. So then we went back again, did a Clomid, didn't work. Then we took, I think, a break, like a 6-month break, and then we did IUI for 6 months. And it was at the end of the IUI that we're like, we're done. Like at that point, we're diagnosed with undiagnosable infertility.
Which is very common.
It is very common. I was not expecting that. So the next step would have been IVF. And we talked about it, but we both just were like, we're done. Like, especially me, like being the one that was taking the hormones.
Yeah.
And it was a complete mess. Horrible.
Well, it's physically draining, emotional, financially, and for some cases, like there's a lot involved with
so much
with all that.
And really,
none of it was covered by insurance.
Right.
So that meant that everything's out of pocket. So
which added to the emotional toll of all of
Sure.
it. Now it's taking a financial strain on top of emotional and physical and all of that. At that point, I said I'm done. Like I don't care if IVF is successful. Like I do not want to go down that road. It costs a lot of money. And what if it is not successful and then we still don't have a child and then we still want children? So then we pursue adoption. For us, it was just a pretty clear answer of if we're going to build a family, adoption is the way to go. And one of the things that made that decision easier for us is we've always talked about adoption. We just thought we'd have biological children and then maybe we'd foster adopt or like just do foster care. So like it was always something that was on the back burner for us. And I think that made the decision so much easier. But one of the things that was hard for me was just like grieving all of that. And I don't think I was expecting that just because we did always have a casual approach to all of it. Adoption was always still like on the table for us. But for myself, I really needed to grieve like the biological children aspect.
Yeah.
So once we decided that we were done trying to have biological children, we took another long pause. Even though we knew adoption was going to happen, I needed that pause for myself. Like one, just for my body to like readjust and like get off the hormones and balance out, but also just mostly emotionally, like just giving myself space to give up that idea, and then find an agency and like dive into all of that. So I think we gave us about a year. It was almost a year from last treatment to signing with Adoption from the Heart.
And for you, Mike, how did it feel as like the support person for her as she was going through a lot of the physical stuff that journey encompasses? Like, where were you at with everything? How did you feel about your situation as a couple?
Definitely had its rough spots.
Yeah.
Very swingy. You never quite know what you get during the day. And
Mm-hmm.
just the level kind of like as it started out, it wasn't terrible in the sense of like fairly consistent to normal, but like every month it got progressively worse.
Right.
And so like till the end, it was just like Marie mentioned about like she was emotionally done and physically done.
Yeah.
I was at the same point. It
Yeah.
wasn't that it was impacting her, not me. It was definitely definitely impacting both of us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, made a logical decision.
Right. It was honestly a really easy decision for us. It's just we were both done at the same point.
Sure.
And I'm really grateful. He always gave me like, you tell me when you're done because you're the one that's like, my body is the one that's going through it. So when I'm done, he's on board. And that made it really, it just made it easy to be like together on that, not him wanting to continue pursuing this when I'm like, I'm emotionally and physically done. The other thing that was really interesting, when we made that decision to stop treatment, it was like, even though I still needed to grieve all of it, but it was almost like an instant mental switch where I'm like, I no longer want to get pregnant. I can't really explain it, because to go from wanting and trying and putting myself through that in every way to just go from, I really want this, to like, I don't want it.
Well, it's like a relief, right?
Yeah,
Like you
it
let
felt
go of this
right.
goal that you thought you had, and you're able to feel relief of, I don't need to
think
keep
that's it.
struggling
Yeah.
anymore because now I have a new plan in place.
Right. I think that's it. Just the relief of like, we're gonna let this
Yeah.
part go, give myself some space to move on, and then pursue it wholeheartedly without any like, oh, I still want to get pregnant. Like, no.
Well, and we're just so grateful that you guys are sharing your experience with this, because I still think that it's a very hush-hush conversation, and not a lot of people talk about their fertility journey and what goes into it, whether you're doing it alone or with a partner. Both people are affected emotionally, physically, financially, mentally. Like there's a lot, your families, right? The people in your life who maybe were there to support you. So we think it's important as an adoption agency to shed light on that and be very respectful of it. I find this comes up a lot when I'm counseling birth parents and they're trying to understand, well, who are these families, these profiles that I'm flipping through the book? Like, who are these people? Where did they come from? Why do they want a kid? They don't always understand or recognize what you've been through, even prior to coming to Adoptions from the Heart. And your story, unfortunately, we hear all the time, right? Of kind of attempting to biologically conceive. You get to the point where you say, enough is enough. We just want to be parents. So I really appreciate that you guys are willing to share that with our community. And I also want to make sure that folks recognize that when we are working with prospective adoptive parents, the initial counseling part involves making sure that there's been closure to any sort of infertility journey that families have been on. And I like that you say you took a pause to grieve, because you are grieving. You're grieving a loss of a path you thought you were going to be on that's no longer there. So I like that you took that pause for yourselves before you entered the chapter of adoption.
I think to touch on that grieving part a little bit, it's not just grieving like the biological part, but like on a deeper note, it's grieving like whose eye will a child have? Who will they look like? Whose personality will they have? Like there's these physical traits too that like when you're building a family, like you can't help but envision what your child's gonna look like and to dream about, the combinations or like, so there's so much more to it than just grieving like the pregnancy.
Absolutely.
Like, we have adopted a child now, and I don't look at him and like, oh, well, what if he would have her eyes or like, there's none of that now, because that has been dealt with, that has been grieved. I don't need to look at him and try to find parts that might match us, because it doesn't matter.
Sure. For you, Mike, when you look at your child today, Luca's how old?
He's just about 2 years.
He's 2 years old. Is this how you thought it would go? Like being a parent through adoption. Talk to us about that experience and like what advice you would give to those folks who are still in that space of maybe still biologically trying to conceive. Like what advice would you give now that you're on the other end of it?
Yeah, I think the only thing that's not there is the DNA. And so like, just kind of the personalities there, and you never know what you're gonna get. Like even if it's biological, you just like, I've got a lot of nieces and nephews, and like siblings are so very different from each other. obviously sharing a lot of DNA, and so like to that extent, I really don't see that as a big deal there. Like Luke is great. We do a lot of stuff together and play a lot of board games, and he really likes to sit there and roll the dice. And from working in the shop, he likes to come down and see what I'm doing. He loves screwdrivers and like just all those things that like he's very very engaged. And I think that part, like regardless of the situation, like he's our kid.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you guys are officially active again, wanting to build their family a second time. Any fears that you have right now, or maybe just like your perspective is a little bit different this second time around versus the first time before you were placed with Luca?
In terms of fears, not really any particular like fears there. Kind of interesting. One of the questions that I've gotten a lot from people is like, how is adoption the second time relative to the first? Is it the same amount of paperwork? Because that was a lot of paperwork. Things like that. It's like, realistically, because
that doesn't change.
Yeah,
that never changes.
The bright side, though, is like going through the home study the first time. It's like the bulk of it is like figuring out where to go for everything, the timing of everything, etc. And so like the renewals and the due process are very similar to each other. Like your backstory isn't going to change from one adoption to the next. And so all that going into it, I think, is logistically about where we'd expected. One of the interesting things, though, when we adopted Luca, it was right during kind of the peak to end of COVID. And so placement rates were very low during that window. And like we got quite a few situation reports where it's like we weren't trimmed this month. Like we know that.
Yeah.
And so just the waiting aspects. Didn't like the waiting, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Like,
waiting is hard.
When we adopted Luca, we got a call about 16 hours heads up to be in Pittsburgh and plan to stay there, which is about 4 hours away, for 2 to 3 weeks. And so like that whole like that scenario, we kind of knew that was a likely situation, and it happened. So just that like snap a finger, drop everything, and doing that again this time logistically with a child
will be that's the part I'm probably the most nervous about, is just like logistically, how does that work out? I mean, it might not even be the situation, but you know.
Well, we always say two placements are never the same. So it's a matter of just trying to be flexible, but it is different. And the reality is you now have a little one at home that you have to think about for the procedure of what happens through placement. I know sometimes families will say that when you're adopting again, now you have a child at home already. And not to say that the wait time is, there's still anxiety, but it's a little different because now your mind is a little preoccupied.
I think that part will be different just because, you know, we're going into Mother's Day, and I'm like, we're going to be a waiting family over Mother's Day, where a couple years ago, Mother's Day would have been a lot harder. Where now this year, you know, I'm a mom. I'm a part of Mother's Day other than beyond celebrating our moms, like, I'll also be celebrated. So there, and holidays and all that, it'll definitely be easier this time around because we do have a child. So I don't know. I mean, we'll see.
Yeah.
It might be completely different than what I expect, but I don't expect it to be too difficult.
Okay. And then just as a final topic, can you just share what the agency has meant to you over the years in terms of support from your local office?
So kind of a little bit of backstory there is we narrowed it down to a handful of agencies when we were selecting the first time. And so we interviewed a couple of the social workers, and because it goes both ways. Like you're interviewing the agency as much as they're interviewing the adoptive parents in this case. And so just kind of seeing like what are policies. There was one that we ruled out on, just like we didn't feel good about it.
Yeah.
And narrowed it down to 2, and just overall felt much better about adoptions from the heart. We had friends that used them and went through with a good experience, and so we decided to take that leap there. And the experience was great. It was, I mean, adoption is unpredictable. There's a lot going on there in terms of logistics and all that, and really I think things went about as smoothly as they could. And obviously we're using adoption from the heart again, so that I think tells a good story there.
And also just to touch on our friend's experience was great. Most times if you ask an adoptive parent, they're on the other side, their experience was great. You know, they have the child, they have the end result. And that's good, but like it was important for us to find an agency that advocated for birth parents, advocated for adoptees, and offered post-placement support for them. And we weren't finding that in some of the agencies that we had interviewed. So that was something that was really important for us. And Adoption from the Heart did meet, the really high standards that I had. Not that, I'm sure agencies are not perfect in every scenario, but we were really happy with what the policies that Adoption from the Heart had.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great topic because
I could go into a
whole
episode.
Well, and it's interesting as social workers when we're doing intakes with prospective adoptive families, the questions they ask, that's very interesting to dissect because the exact topic that you're talking about, when somebody asks me that question, what type of services do you provide birth parents specifically, and then what do you do post-placement for all members of the triad, that shows your understanding and respect, not just for placement and getting a child, but the future and long-term of the open adoption.
I mean, adoption goes like it's forever. It's gonna forever change future generations. So like that stuff is important.
Absolutely.
And I think, a lot of times it's so easy to get caught up in the, I want a baby, I want a child, I want to be a parent. But there's just so much more to adoption.
You don't just walk in and a baby's handed to you, right? It's a little more than that.
And it should be a lot more than that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we are appreciative that you've been able to share your experience even before you turned to Adoptions from the Heart, and that you overall have had a great journey in building your family. Lots of luck on number 2.
Thank you. We're excited and nervous and anxious. And
all good things coming your way.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to our audience for tuning in. It's always great to hear from clients who have been through it. Please continue to tune into Adoptions from the Heart TV, and we'll see you all soon.